You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your loving people with disabilities host, Abraham.
And I am your wearing my fancy socks host, Shane.
We're a psychology. You always get me. It's so good. We're a psychology podcast. We talk about the things that people do, what animals do, why they do them, and sometimes we talk specifically about diagnoses and disabilities.
Yeah, it doesn't come up as often as maybe it could, but it is one of those ones where I think that both of us have spent a lot of time working with folks with IDDD diagnoses. And this is, I think, a topic that is near and dear to both our hearts.
Yes. And will you elaborate those acronyms and initialisms for people?
Yes. I'm sorry. IDDD means intellectual delay developmental disability.
Yes. So those are the populations with whom we have some experience of familiarity, and I think a general respect and appreciation. And we try and have that come through in our discussions. And we have unpacked a variety of diagnoses on this show. But for a psychology podcast, we don't dig into them that often. And primarily, I think, because it's usually simply describing this is what this thing is. Here's the history. Here's the treatment. And that can be interesting. And that's kind of what I think we have to say about today's discussion. But, you know, trying to find that hook, the angle, the discussion is always a critical piece to have people feel like they're really getting something meaningful out of it. And I think sometimes you just got to have the passion. And I feel like I've got that for this topic.
Yes, absolutely. These are some of my favorite folks to work with and to hang out with and volunteer with. It's just, they're the best.
Now, if you are joining us for the first time, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you do, you can support us by leaving us a rating and review, by subscribing, by joining us on Patreon, by picking up some merch, by starting a charitable organization that donates to a disability community and naming it Why We Do What We Do, and then just giving us at least a small piece of that credit while you can do all the hard work. And thank you for doing that. You're the best.
Yeah, so great. You're so wonderful.
I'll talk more about how you can support us at the end of this discussion. Also, if you're joining us for the first time, we'd like to welcome you to the variety of dates that we have to celebrate on our February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day, Shane.
Yeah. Happy Valentine's Day, Abraham. We love you. It's also Ash Wednesday, so don't freak out if you see people with smudges on their faces.
Yeah, I think I mentioned on this podcast before, the first time, because I had never seen the black cross on the forehead until I was in my mid-20s. And all of a sudden, one day, people are just walking around with these black smudges on their face. And I was like, was there like a fire somewhere? And people are just kind of going about their day now? Like, what happened?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I don't think I noticed it until I was an adult either. And I was like, what is happening?
Yeah, maybe I just didn't notice, but it's also Frederick Douglass Day, so go read you some Frederick Douglass.
Mm-hmm. Yep, he had a tiny bed.
Oh, I heard that.
Well, I got to do a tour of his house when I was a kid, and he had a tiny bed. He slept sitting up, apparently. It's also League of Women Voters Day.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
This is Library Lovers Day, so Shane falls in that camp.
Oh, yeah, big fan. Libraries are so important.
Yes.
It's a National Condom Awareness Day. I guess that lines up with Valentine's Day pretty well.
Yeah, and Library Lovers Day. What does the lovers part mean there?
Ooh.
Also, National Cream-Filled Chocolates Day. So maybe that's related too.
Nice. Real nice. I did see that Easter candy is coming out, and so Cadbury eggs are back. And I am just such a... It's a weakness of mine. It's my kryptonite. I will eat so many Cadbury cream eggs. It's a real problem. It's also National Donor Day. So, it makes sense because it's Valentine's Day, so you give someone your heart.
It's the last thing you'll ever do, but it's so nice.
The sentiment is nice.
It's Pet Theft Awareness Day. Don't steal people's pets. That's
not nice.
That's bad.
That's so mean. It's Read to Your Child Day, which I think lines up with Library Lovers Day, hopefully.
Yeah, I would hope so. Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia Staff Education Week. So
so specific.
Remember this week.
Yes. It's also a celebration of Love Week. You know, I guess they're going to extend Valentine's Day for a couple more days.
Yeah, it's Valentine's week. It is Getting Dizzy Week. So, yeah, dizzy with love.
Dizzy with love. The last but not least is that it's Love Data Week.
Ooh, I love data.
Which we both like that one.
We feel the love and loving the data. We don't actually just talk about the dates. We also like to dig into the topic at hand, which is actually really all we should be doing, but that's where we're at. At this point, this has become kind of a joke, but dare I say we say that this will be a shorter episode.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's a running kind of talking point with us, and we're going to see exactly how long we can make this one. So
yeah,
let's go ahead and do it, I guess. Let's see what we do. Let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. And I will also say, we haven't actually said this yet. We are talking about Down syndrome. We're going to dig into a little bit of the history, the diagnosis, the treatment, the complications, etc., what it is and what you should know about it, and all those questions that you might have. And maybe you're someone with Down syndrome or you know someone with Down syndrome, and that's great. And I would have loved, I definitely have people around me that have Down syndrome, and I should have invited them into this discussion. But here's the issue. I planned this and started writing it about 12 hours ago before this recording. That is an insufficient amount of time to ask someone to dedicate time to, come in and join us for this discussion. So my bad. I'm really sorry. If you are someone with Down syndrome or know someone with Down syndrome who would like to come on and talk with us, we would absolutely love to have them. Please come our way one way or another.
Yeah.
Reach out to us directly. Let us know. You can reach us at info@wwdpodcast.com. I'm sorry we don't have one of you folk on here to have this discussion with. We will do our best, and please join us. We'd love to have your voice.
Yes, we love doing follow-ups. So anytime, feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to chat.
Yes, I just need to plan better is the problem here, because I just got the inspiration,
We kind of have a little bit behind the curtain for folks that are listening. We have a little bit of a science fair project vibe going on here where, we kind of procrastinate to the last minute and get it all done. So, it's one of those things where we put the notes together usually the day of or the day before. And so and we really try. I mean, and that's not to say that we don't read a lot and do a lot of stuff on this beforehand. It's just usually when we write the notes, it's the day of or the day before. So, because we get really into it. We do our rabbit holes.
Exactly. It's like we knew we wanted to talk about it at some point, and I sort of put it on the list. And then, like I said, about 12 hours ago, I'm like, I really want to do this tomorrow, and just decided that was what I was going to do. The muse struck me, and I was like, that's it. It is time to write this. And so I did. And so anyway, that left us no time to invite a person with Down syndrome onto our podcast to join us. And as I said, I'm sorry, but we should have, and I hope that someone will join us in the future so that we can talk to them about this, and we'll plan better.
Yes. So in the meantime, I think we can go ahead and dive into the topic.
Let's do it.
And just to kind of from the very beginning, we are going to talk about Down syndrome, and it is so important to start with how we even get there.
Yes.
If you are not familiar, when two people love each other, or they drunkenly meet at a frat party, or they just hook up, or they do all kinds of things, right? They don't even have to love each other. It could just be a thing that happens. They might do this thing called sex. And when they do, depending on what gametes they bring to the table, a sperm and an egg, right? They bring their ingredients to the table, and whether or not some sort of contraception is used, those gametes combine.
Yes, we're starting here. It's important actually to start here for reasons. We'll explain. Each gamete is a haploid cell, which means that it contains a single set of chromosomes. Now, in the human's case, a set contains 23 chromosomes, which means that once they combine, they will have 46 chromosomes that are in pairs. It's 23 and 23. Each one of those, 1 through 23, will line up so they will have 2 1 chromosomes, 2 2 chromosomes, 2 3 chromosomes, etc., all the way up through their 23rd chromosome. And the 23rd chromosome, just FYI, just fun thing to know, is the one that determines the spectrum of sex, leaning female or leaning male.
Yeah.
The spectrum of sex is in fact a spectrum because despite what you might hear, it is not ever even so clear cut as it being 100% one way or the other. Most of the time, there is a variety of ways that can show up. And that's not what we're talking about today. I just wanted to share that it was that last 23rd chromosome where that happens.
Bingo. Dino DNA.
Yeah. So about 1 in every 700 to about 1 in every 1,000 babies will have a random change occur during the cell division process that results in an extra partial or full 21st chromosome, such that the child will have 47 total chromosomes instead of 46. For this reason, it is technically called trisomy 21, meaning 3 copies of chromosome 21, rather than the more common 2 copies. Although there are 2 other types that we'll talk about later. So it's kind of like, from a simple explanation, like I think of like when I have to make copies at a printer and then like one of the sheets just like has too much ink or the toner's gone or something happens. Like I've got all my copies, but I've got an extra one that was kind of a proof copy that didn't really work very well.
All right. Yeah, that's probably not terribly far off. We'll get a little bit more into the genetics of this, but that's essentially what happens is that we have these little chromosome things. They determine more or less what we're going to look like. And if you have an extra copy in the 21st one, then you'll have this thing called Down syndrome. Now, why is it called that? The history of this is colorful.
As you would imagine for anything that has to do with psychology or the medical field or anything like that.
Yes, particularly with the date of this one, because this is a random alteration that can happen during pregnancy. It is simply part of the human condition and has been described or depicted or alluded to in art and literature for thousands of years. Pretty much as long as we have records of humans, there's some indication that they've had the experience of Down syndrome people being born around and there. However, it was not completely described or even identified as a specific thing until it was named for a man, John Langdon Down, a British physician who first classified this in 1866. And so if that gives you any idea where this is going, you can probably predict, and it's where you think.
Yeah, fair heads up, there's going to be some discussion around some of the terminology and some of the racism that was occurring around this thing, this particular diagnosis at the time. So I just want to kind of prepare everyone for that.
Yeah, trigger warning. This is aggressively racist and bigoted.
And we'll do our best to not be jerks about it. So Down believed that it was possible to, quote, classify different types of conditions by ethnic characteristics, end quote. And that was from the article Adamen et al. In 2021. Now, the paper that described trisomy 21 was called, quote, Observations on the Ethnic Classifications of Idiots, end quote. So, yes, that was, again, 1866. We know better, we do better. Amidst the variety of conditions to which he cavalierly assigned an ethnicity for some reason, he called the condition that he would later be diagnosed as having, like when we talked about Down syndrome specifically, he originally called it Mongolism, and the people with this condition, Mongoloids. So that's where that term comes from, if you are unfamiliar with that.
And yes, again, this is in reference to an ethnicity which he believed was how you would classify this thing. Because anyway,
yeah,
his paper was almost autobiographical in its title in that way. So
nice.
Anyway, just to crack a little joke at the expense of someone who did not need to go down that route. And again, also accepting that like they didn't really know better. They were just learning this for the first time. They had a lot of stupid hypotheses that they would not know were stupid in their entire lifetimes. That is where we are.
Right.
But we know how stupid these are, and they are ads. Had to do it, but we're back. The advertisers did their thing. All right, a question you may or may not have.
The question that comes up a lot is it Down or Downs syndrome? Downs with an apostrophe. And technically, both are listed as acceptable names. In America, Down syndrome, without the apostrophe S, has generally been accepted as the preferred spelling. I wonder if the desire to apply down as an adjective and the fact that down is already a common English word had some influence on the decision to add the S at the end. Using it as an adjective to describe a Downs child would mean something different to most English speakers than a down child. And that's just kind of more speculation. It's hard to say. Language is strange. Language is interesting. Language is unique. And language requires a lot of social context and regional variance.
It is possible also that they just wanted to apply ownership to John Langdon Down. And so it's Downs syndrome. But who knows? I couldn't find any definitive reason why they decided to cling to Down as the name, other than he was the person who first described it as being its own condition and did so comprehensively.
Right.
Anyway, that's sort of where we're at. So he was simply describing essentially the physical characteristics and other characteristic features of what would later be called Down syndrome. He didn't know that it was a chromosomal difference that was responsible for the physical presentation of that condition. because they really didn't know anything about chromosomes at that time at all.
Right.
That really didn't come until nearly a whole century later, because this was 1866, and it was not until 1959. It was actually January 26th, so we actually just barely missed the 65th anniversary of this.
Wow.
I know, right? By French geneticists, and this is a very long name, Jérôme Jean-Louis Marie Lejeune.
Wow.
Often just called Dr. I think
Joe. Dr. Joe.
Dr. Joe. Yeah, that's what it is. Dr. Lejeune, I think, is the most common. But anyway, so this discovery that this was a chromosomal condition and what the chromosomal condition that was responsible for creating Down syndrome was, this absolutely kicked off basically a whole new field, like a research field into genetic conditions by looking at things like chromosomes as they related to some of these genetic outcomes. So it was a groundbreaking moment in medical history.
Yeah, this is huge. Right now, at the time that's recording, it's 2024. And so research on genetics has advanced so rapidly, and they do so much interesting, fascinating stuff. And especially when it comes to genetic anomalies or any sort of specifically chromosomal mutations and all that. Like, there's so many things that are interesting to unpack within that. So this is a big deal. I mean, this is like a pivotal moment in human history for studying this type of thing.
And I think that Dr. Lejeune lived until like maybe 2014 or something like that.
Wow.
So yeah, they would have lived to have seen a huge amount of development that occurred as a result of their discovery, which would have probably, I imagine, been very satisfying for them.
That's all that I feel like scientists just want, is to know that they did something helpful.
Right.
And could you imagine doing that? Like, where you're like, okay, we found this thing. And it sparked this, so much help for so many folks, hopefully. So,
right. Yeah, I hope so. And I also hope that they were not, I didn't really research this person, so I hope that they were not a terrible person.
Yeah.
But
we don't need another Watson showing up here. Right.
I hope that they both deserved that recognition and enjoyed it later. And if I'm wrong, feel free to come on and correct me, and we'll speak to that in a later episode.
Yeah, we're fine with addendums. We're good with addendums. Like, we have no problem with that.
Yeah.
So as we said earlier, there are actually 3 types of Down syndrome, or chromosome 21 alterations. So 95% of people with Down syndrome have trisomy 21, in which the extra chromosome occurs during the development of the sperm or egg cell. So basically, it's just an alteration that happens during the cell split, and this is 95% of people that have Down syndrome.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A cell splits, one chromosome goes one way, another one goes the other way. In this case, 2 go one way and another copy of one goes the other way, ending up with 3. However, there are these rare instances in which an extra chromosome occurs only in some cells rather than all cells after fertilization occurs. And this is called mosaicism, or mosaic Down syndrome. And again, that just means that rather than all cells having the 47 pairs of chromosomes, 46 plus the extra chromosome, some of them have that and not all of them.
Okay.
And then there's a third type of Down syndrome called translocation Down syndrome.
Right. So in translocation Down syndrome, quote, a portion of chromosome 21 becomes attached or translocated onto other chromosomes before or at conception. These children have the usual 2 copies of chromosome 21, but they also have additional genetic material from chromosome 21 attached to other chromosomes. And that comes from the Mayo Clinic. We found a resource that indicated that this was often chromosome 14. So where that additional chromosome, that copy was attached, it would attach to 14 as well.
Yeah, it just attaches to another chromosome for some reason, and then you get this sort of translocation Down syndrome. So it's not actually an extra chromosome, it's an extra piece of 21, chromosome 21 copied elsewhere.
Right.
So it's but they're all sort of in the spectrum of Down syndrome, but most of them are that trisomy 21.
Basically what it is that chromosome 21 makes a copy. How it applies or how it manifests or how it shows up is where the 3 different types come in.
Yes.
It always starts with 21.
Yeah, that's the magic number. So we need to get into a lot of sort of what Down syndrome even is. We sort of talk about this as being the cause. Like, we know that when you have these changes to the cell during the cell division that result in an extra 21st chromosome, you get Down syndrome.
Right.
Why that happens, we're not totally sure, and we'll talk about that. I think it's really important to state here so that everybody is very clearly aware. Down syndrome is not a disease. It's not an illness. It's not an affliction. It's not contagious. It's not even technically hereditary. And really what that means is that this seems to happen somewhat randomly. You try and look at some factors: wealth, diet, chemicals, ethnicity. Nothing really seems to predict whether or not someone is likely to have a child with Down syndrome. We don't even know exactly what causes those rogue changes to occur, although there are some sort of known risk factors, if you want to call them that. Primarily, it's that this does tend to happen in older parents. So as we said, it's about 1 in 700 to 1 in 1,000, in that range of children. At the age of I think it was about 35, it goes to about 1 in 300. By 45, it goes to 1 in 100. And then after, I want to say 50, it goes to 1 in 30.
Wow.
The correlation between the occurrence of Down syndrome increases pretty rapidly as age increases in the parents. So waiting later in life is just more likely that kind of alteration is going to happen. Again, not a guarantee.
Sure.
Still, most people, the vast majority of people, are not going to have a child with Down syndrome, even if they have a child later in life. It does mean that someone who has a child with Down syndrome, if they have more children, they're more likely to have another child with Down syndrome. We don't tend to get any younger between children. In fact, we just keep aging, as it turns out.
Yeah, weird.
And therefore, if you are already going to have one, there is a somewhat elevated chance that you may have another one. But again, even most cases, that's not true. It's just there's an elevated likelihood.
Right, absolutely. Now, the way that it might actually be hereditary, though, is in the translocation Down syndrome variation. So because in translocation Down syndrome, some of that 21st chromosome may be attached to other chromosomes, these can be passed from either parent to child during conception. So that's really the only time that you're seeing the hereditary part, but otherwise it's a fairly random thing.
Yeah. It really does seem like anybody, this could have impact any family, any person, anywhere, just happens.
Right.
Part of the human condition, sometimes this happens. And however it occurs, whyever it occurs, it does come with some relatively common physical characteristics and some complications that we should get into now.
We're going to start talking about a little bit of the symptoms that go along with this. And as you might expect, before genetic testing, Down syndrome would be diagnosed only after birth based on physical characteristics. And so if you've ever been around somebody with Down syndrome, there are some pretty clear characteristics that you can identify.
Yeah, and this is due to the fact that Down syndrome frequently comes with these common physical features, which includes things like a flattened face, especially the bridge of the nose being really low and sort of close to the facial plane, as well as sort of almond-shaped slanted eyes. And the way they say the eyes are slanted up, what they mean by that is that the outside corners are elevated so that it almost kind of forms a sort of V shape, if you will. Like the inner corners of the eyes are sort of a little bit lower and the outer corners a little bit higher.
Right.
This is also apparently called palpable fissures is a name for this. And that just has to do, again, with how it's oriented.
Right. Some folks with Down syndrome may have a shorter neck. They may have small, flat ears, and they may have small hands and feet and short fingers and toes as well.
Often they'll also have flat feet. I saw many pictures that also indicated like a pretty widely far apart big toe from the other toes. But yeah, flat feet. They also often have the tongue that sort of protrudes from the mouth slightly when they're in a relaxed state. So the tongue might just be poking out a little bit.
Right. They may be a little bit shorter than most folks. They may have tiny white spots on the iris of their eye. This is called Brushfield spots, which is, I think, interesting. I've never heard that until just now.
I didn't bother to look up the history of why it was called Brushfield spots. I felt like enough people were getting their name dropped for their relative contributions to this that I didn't need to explore all of them. But another common feature is just poor muscle tone, really low muscle tone, I think. Maybe poor is not the right word, but low muscle tone. But interestingly, they also tend to be highly flexible.
Right. They may also have broad, short hands with a single crease in the palm, and they may experience slower growth and development. Now, I think I want to point out here is that this is not necessarily true for every single person that has Down syndrome, but these are very, very common things that you might see in folks as they physically develop.
Exactly. They might have one of these features. They might have a few of these features. They might have all of these features. But even sometimes they might have none of them, and they might be barely visible at all. And sometimes they're very apparent. Either way, just because these are physical characteristics of Down syndrome, we always want to point out that people with Down syndrome are all going to look and act as unique individual humans that they are.
Yes.
So it is not correct. It is not appropriate, but it's also not accurate to say that they all look the same. Or they might have some physical features that are somewhat characteristic of that diagnosis, but they look like their parents. They just have like
right.
those features. So like they're individuals, they're humans, they're people
yes.
they're unique in who they are.
I would hope that would go without saying, especially for our listenership, but just in case, yes, every person, if they have Down syndrome or not, are their own person, but every person with Down syndrome are absolutely their own person. They are going to look different from one another. It is not a copy of the person across multiple humans. It is unique individuals with unique interests and unique personalities, and I think it's so, so, so important to reiterate that.
Yes, yeah, and you're right. I would hope it would go without saying, and it just felt like it was worth pointing out, just in case there were some misconceptions
sure,
about that.
Sure.
I would hope that we could go an entire episode without having to play some ads. Okay, so we've been talking about some of those physical characteristics, and also I think it's worth talking about, besides those, how this is sort of identified.
So as testing has gotten more sophisticated, scans and blood tests can determine in utero if a child is likely to have Down syndrome, giving families more time to prepare for the kind of supports that they may need. This is a common discussion around the Down syndrome advocates group and support groups and parents that are like new parents. There's a lot of discussion around this, I think, and it's going to be really interesting to get into.
First thing, there's kind of two ways to go about this. There's screening, which essentially looks for how likely is it that a child will be born with Down syndrome.
Right.
And then there's testing, which identifies, yes, this child has Down syndrome, or no, this child does not have Down syndrome.
Right.
That's one thing to know about this. The other thing is there was kind of a wormhole I decided not to go down about this testing and how it relates to people's decision to have abortions. First of all, we've talked about abortion. We did 2 episodes on this. I believe it was a 2-parter. At least we did an episode.
Yeah.
Where we come from politically is fairly clear. We're in support of people and whatever is best for the health and well-being of people. And abortion is medical health care. And I think people have a right to medical health care. There's a lot of nuance that goes into that. And I also I think advocacy groups would, and again, I didn't really dig into this because I felt like I didn't really want to go this route in this discussion.
Right.
But they point to the fact that you're going to have a child with some kind of genetic disability or abnormality or difference is not cause to say that this is not going to be the kind of life that you would enjoy.
Right.
Meaning that you get to have a child, you're wanting to have a child, you get to have a child, it's going to be the child that you have that is your child, and love them the way they are. And I think that in general, I would agree with that sentiment. And I don't want to pose my own values or morals in any way on people's choices about this, other than to say, make, the choice that's best for you and your family and what you think you can do. And I think hopefully as we describe more of Down syndrome, you'll understand that these are wonderful people and the world needs a lot of them, in my opinion.
Yes.
Which we'll get to in a second.
Agreed.
Anyway, didn't want to go down a huge rabbit hole on that. My opinion's my opinion. Your opinion is your opinion. We mostly wanted to talk about this from a psychological perspective. So we'll continue down that route. I apologize if I got anyone really worked up, but hey, maybe I got your attention. You're really, really listening now. So maybe there's that.
Yeah. I mean, and please feel free to write in and have a discussion. I mean, we're more than happy to do that too. So
let's do it.
So one of the major features of Down syndrome, or at least common features, is cognitive impact. Cognitive impact comes up quite a bit. Not that every single person with Down syndrome has major cognitive impact, but it is something that does come up quite often, and you'll see that discussion more often than not.
Now, part of this is speech delay. The low muscle tone that's commonly seen as a feature of physical characteristics of Down syndrome often mean that speech can be difficult or delayed, because the muscles in our throat and our tongues are muscles, and we use them for speech development. So if those are delayed in some way, that can impact speech development, because those muscles just need a little bit more to work in a way that allows it to develop at a pace that generally is prescribed as being expected.
So in addition to what we've talked about with speech development, people with Down syndrome may have a wide range of cognitive impairments and delays in their development. So this can vary greatly depending on the person, depending on unique circumstances. It can depend on a lot of things. But one common feature of Down syndrome is difficulty with short or long-term memory, which can also be apparent in difficulty with learning. So sometimes memory gets in the way of learning. It can be a unique challenge. And it's not that they can't learn. It's just that they may take a little bit more time and some additional support, or at least some really good resources around supporting that person's unique learning needs.
Yes. And sometimes it is very impactful and very difficult to get to a point of like total independence. And sometimes it takes very little. It just takes like a little bit of additional support and they're totally there for it. And I mean, that is the case for literally all kids of all backgrounds and all like across the spectrum of life.
Yeah.
So again, they're not different really in that way from people who don't have Down syndrome.
Right.
But one thing is that Down syndrome can be comorbid with other diagnoses at a somewhat higher rate than you might find in the general population, such as autism, ADHD, anxiety, and depression, which may be counterintuitive to how some people experience individuals with Down syndrome, but that definitely is a diagnosis that can be comorbid with Down syndrome, and it's important to be aware of that.
Right. And just like the physical characteristics that we just talked about, this is going to be unique. These cognitive impairments or anything that might be going on here, these comorbid diagnoses, they're going to be unique and entirely individual to that person. So every person with Down syndrome is a unique person with their own personality, set of strengths and difficulties, talents, preferences, and idiosyncrasies. We are more alike than we are different. And I think that's really important to land on, again, when we are talking about a specific diagnosis, a specific disability, anything like that. Every single person is unique.
Yes. And to that end, as I said, there is the perception, and I've sort of had this experience myself, that people with Down syndrome are always seen as happy, friendly, kind, and very personable. And they're often described as sweet and charming and loving. And while these are beautifully complementary things and definitely something that you will see in a lot of people who have this diagnosis, it is, of course, worth reiterating again and again and again until you firmly understand this. Everyone is different. We should not just assume that someone with Down syndrome is happy all of the time. They experience the same spectrum of emotions that everyone else will. They are human beings. Like they have all the experiences of human beings. They may have physical characteristics that stand out a little bit. They may have some impairments that make it so that they require a little additional support. But generally speaking, like they're really, as you said, we're more alike than we are different. Those of us with and without this diagnosis.
Having worked with a lot of folks with Down syndrome, that I can just anecdotally, that's been the case, right? Like I've worked with some that are very happy-go-lucky and like super personable and like really friendly, and other ones that are like do not want you around and want nothing to do with you. And again, that was a unique thing. It had nothing to do with the fact that they had Down syndrome. It had everything to do with that person had that specific, issue that day, or that concern, or that was just kind of how they were as a general rule.
Yeah, who they are and what they're going through at the time that you're speaking with them. And like, I will, we'll be sharing our opinion later, but I have loved every person I've ever met with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Every one of them has had fantastic personalities. Even, as you said, they're all different. They weren't always happy, but like I always really enjoyed who they were as people, and everyone I've ever met. So.
Right. Absolutely. I do think it's worth talking about some complications that can come up that are kind of unique to this diagnosis in particular, because I think that, just like any sort of, I would imagine some type of chromosomal or genetic complication or alteration, it's going to produce some unique medical issues.
Yes. This can come with some complications that require additional medical treatment or support. One common complication that I think I've heard more than anything else is heart problems. These can be detected at birth and may require medications or even surgery or other interventions, but it is something that can be a serious complication for many people with Down syndrome.
And some people with Down syndrome can have gastrointestinal issues, including abnormalities of the esophagus, trachea, intestines, and anus. They can develop intestinal blockage and be more prone to acid reflux and heartburn. As a matter of fact, those two things that we just mentioned, the heart issues and GI issues, those two things together also produce unique aspiration risks. And so if you are working in a space where you might have somebody who has Down syndrome and also has like really severe problem behavior, you can't do any sort of restraints that require them to lay face down. It's like they're most of the time not medically cleared to be able to use those types of procedures in the event of an emergency where that might be a requirement.
Well, and as we described in our episode on excited delirium, I mean, generally just putting someone in a face down position at all is high enough risk that you just shouldn't do it.
Right.
Like the risk that someone could stop breathing in that position is higher for everyone. And as you said, especially for many people with Down syndrome. But like, let's just not create that risk for anybody, I think.
Yeah. And just enrich the environment. Do better interventions so you don't have to do that. That's my thought. It's like spend more time enriching the environment and preventing that from even being needed.
Exactly. Yeah, just provide the appropriate supports, and like that will clear up 99 to 100% of the potential for any issues that might otherwise come up. Okay, complications. People with Down syndrome are more likely to have a misalignment at the top of the vertebrae of the neck, which can lead to some serious spinal complications that can necessitate surgery. Sometimes it will mean that they're wheelchair bound or require some walking supports or other kinds of medical interventions, depending on how that affects them. But it is a complication of Down syndrome.
And also people with Down syndrome are often, and again, this is not everyone, but are often, they have an increased risk of obesity and have difficulty maintaining a lower weight, which is not so easy just diet and exercise for folks with this disorder, or this syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is having the low muscle tone. Part of it is just like, this is just a feature of a thing that can happen, is it's just difficult. And that, of course, comes with its own set of complications, obesity. So you really can't just say like, oh, just, start running every day and start watching your calories. Like that isn't always an option, first of all.
Right.
If you imagine if they're having other spinal issues or other complicated health issues, strenuous exercise may not be recommended anyway. That might increase their risk of aspiration too.
Right.
It can be much more complicated than simply those recommendations. But, with the appropriate supports, they can get some help to keep that as under check as possible. But again, we just also don't body shame people. I think is a generally good recommendation.
Yeah, exactly. I like that recommendation.
People with Down syndrome are also at a risk of leukemia, a higher risk of leukemia and dementia, as well as other health issues such as endocrine problems, seizures, ear infections. It's actually fairly common to see hearing and vision impairments. They'll often require glasses, often hearing aids. And they may also have dental issues that require additional support and intervention.
Right. And because of these complications, people with Down syndrome have historically died fairly early in life, unfortunately, living only into their 30s at best. But treatment has gotten better. Interventions have gotten better. And so people with Down syndrome are actually living well into their adulthood, even into their 80s in some cases. So we are seeing improvements and improved mortality rates with folks. So,
which is absolutely great.
Which is what we want.
I hope that continues to expand. I hope that they get to live as long and full lives as possible and have the kind of support that's needed to ensure that they are not needlessly suffering from medical or other cognitive complications.
Yes, exactly.
Which speaks to treatments. We've sort of mentioned several. Before much was understood about mental health or anything really, people with any kind of cognitive impairment and often even physical impairment in many cases, they were immediately institutionalized. Like they were born and essentially whisked away to an institution if there was some indication that they had some kind of impairment. Over time, we've learned a lot more about the care and support of people with various disabilities, including Down syndrome, and treatments have gotten much better.
Right. And so for many and most or all the conditions that we listed, specifically related to Down syndrome, all the stuff that has to do with heart, leukemia, dementia, all those things, treatment will consist of medications or surgery specifically within that realm, and treatment within that realm of that particular ailment. So it's not going to be, oh, this person is getting treatment for Down syndrome. It's this person is getting treatment because this heart condition, which may be a result of their Down syndrome, but this heart condition that they have is something that we have to treat.
Right.
I think that's really important too. The locus of intervention and kind of like the origin of that intervention is coming from that kind of other complication, not necessarily from Down syndrome itself.
Yeah, and then there's a complication of being in the podcasting industry, which is that we have to play ads. So we're talking about the treatments here that are there. One of the important things, and this is really true of pretty much all complications or issues that people will face, but early intervention is key. As much as is possible to prevent and help mitigate the most serious of these conditions, for many people can help them live long, healthy, happy lives where the diagnosis that they may have really has very little bearing on their overall day-to-day activities. the earlier we can get in there to support them physically, cognitively, etc., the easier of a time they will have just going through sort of typical expected daily life.
Yeah. And for people with Down syndrome, they can be further supported with speech therapy. Physical and occupational therapy is needed. Behavior analytic oriented therapies can actually help with cognitive development and behavioral improvements. They can occur along what might be considered what is described as, again, this is the language catching up, but quote unquote normal developmental trajectory. So they can actually gain skills needed to live independently, to thrive educationally. I mean, there are folks with Down syndrome that go to get degrees, they go to college. There's nothing to stop them from doing that except for providing some level of support so they can.
Yeah, and often early on, because particularly if it can help get them, it can prevent any particularly severe complications early on, then you don't really need as intensive support later either, and possibly not at all. Like you really just get what's needed to get them thriving independently, and then they're out on their own, and that's great for them. And for some people, it won't be that easy, but like generally speaking, the early investment is a huge payoff down the road. So it's 100% worth it to just spend the time, energy, resources and commitment early on.
Yes.
So that you aren't trying to then fix a problem later that you didn't prevent from happening in the first place.
Yes, that's what it is. I mean, that's absolutely it. I mean, just it's so much better just to kind of get in front and provide the support so it's not needed later. But
exactly,
y'all don't want to talk about that.
So anyway, as you were saying, people with Down syndrome are being more and more represented and included across many fields and aspects of society and culture. People with Down syndrome participate in sports, play music, they're actors, teachers, speakers, they work in offices, they work at hospitals, they get advanced degrees, they write books, they work in the government. They went from being people who were shipped off to institutions the moment that it was recognized that they had some kind of difference to people who are now being included across the entire spectrum of human achievement, which I think is the best possible thing. And I think that the awareness that is brought to people with Down syndrome can only help further that inclusion. And I think that should be the goal. Like,
yes,
as we said, they are a unique, awesome individual people that deserve to have every right and opportunity afforded to them as anyone else would. And so the fact that they've gotten better and more representation is awesome. The more that they can get that, the better, because we want a society that is as inclusive of all of those people as possible, because they have a lot to contribute here. They want to be a part of it, and we want them to be a part of it. They're just as uniquely suited to make meaningful contributions as anyone else, and so it's great to give them those opportunities.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't have said it better myself. So there is a point that I think is worth talking about, and you may have caught it as we were discussing this, is the conversation around identity first versus person first language. This is something that has evolved and changed quite a bit across any time you're working in disabilities or working with folks with some sort of diagnosis. The consensus that I have seen more recently is that it's the person's preference.
Right.
Like, that's kind of what it keeps landing on to me. It's like, you you hear this a lot in the autism community, where do folks prefer saying autistic person or person with autism? And there is still debate about that. There's no agreed upon. Right now, it seems like the majority are kind of going with identity first, like saying autistic person versus person with autism. You're hearing that. But there's not really a formal agreement, and there's no written rule around this. So I generally say go with what the person prefers when you're talking to them. If they prefer Down syndrome person or person with Down syndrome, I think either is fine if that person has a specific preference.
And it's as simple as asking, like, is this part of your identity? Do you want this to be, like, how do you want this to be applied to how I talk to and about you? Like, you want to be called a person with Down syndrome or a Down syndrome person? Like, do you care?
And most of them will say, call me Steve. Like, call me by my name. I don't give a shit about that, because most people don't want that. Like, they're just like, it doesn't matter. Just treat me like a person. And that's really the value you should go with, is like treating that person like a person.
Very, very much so. One of the places, and I'll talk about this here in a second, but I looked at sort of the Nevada Down Syndrome Network, and they advocated for person-first language. But I think, as you said, I think the most compassionate and most sensitive way we can go about it is just asking for the preference. Like, where do you fall on this? Like, do you care Should I just call you Steve, regardless of what your name is?
Well, as somebody who does not have Down syndrome, who am I to make a decision for somebody with Down syndrome on how they prefer to be called? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And I can't believe for a second that anybody that's working in this field has any sort of like strong opinion about that one way or another. It doesn't matter if you don't have it. Let the person who has it make the decision. Oh, God, that's so frustrating. Okay, let me get off my soapbox about that.
No, that was good. That was I think it was a great soapbox to include, actually. I think an important conclusion here is that Down syndrome is not suffering. It's not an affliction. It's not something to feel sorry about. These are just people who have a little bit of a different situation. And again, we're more alike than we are different. So just treat them as people. Treat them as regular, individual, human, unique people with their own personalities and set of stuff going on.
It's simple. I promise you it's that simple.
It is.
It really, truly is.
Now, I've not masked my opinion at all during this discussion. I thought that I was being more sticking to the sort of here are the hard facts, but facts are couched in where you're coming from, and that's sort of where we're at here. Here's my thought on this. Go meet someone with Down syndrome. If you don't already know or haven't met someone with Down syndrome, go meet someone with Down syndrome.
Yes.
Every state, or at least most states, have some kind of Down syndrome network or something that hosts events. They raise charitable donations and awareness, and you can just go participate, just hang out. They raise awareness of Down syndrome events, and you can go take part of them. You can just meet some people, find an event, go meet these people. Like I said, I have loved every person I've ever met with Down syndrome. I want more of them in my life and in the world.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's that is my thought. I love this community. I love those people. I actually, and a lot of people come to this because they have a family member or they like have a really close friend who has Down syndrome, and that's great. And I actually don't have that. I've only met them through like work and opportunity. And like I said, I've loved all of them, and I hope to meet more of them. That's just where I'm coming from is like, I think that everybody should go out and if you haven't already, go meet someone with Down syndrome. You will not regret it.
I 100% agree. Volunteer with your local groups, whether it's Special Olympics, whether it is Down syndrome societies, whatever it is, go volunteer, go spend some time. I promise you the time spent with these folks will make you a better person.
Word. We successfully predicted the length of this by saying it would be a shorter episode. So
as per usual,
a round of applause for us. Let's get to some recommendations, which are unrelated to all the recommendations we've already made, because that's just the thing that we do is we just recommend some things. But before we do that, what we need to do is give credit to where credit is due. As I said, if you would like to support this episode, if you liked what we had to say today and you would like to join us, you can join us on Patreon. You get access to all kinds of extra goodies and behind the scenes content, early episodes, ad-free content, all that sort of thing. You can also pick up some merch, which is very cool to have podcast merch. You're like, wow, that person is so smart. They listen to podcasts. That's what everyone thinks when they see podcast merch. But you can go to our website and find out about that. You can also just leave us a rating and review, like and subscribe, tell a friend. All of those things actually help us out. So consider doing them. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
In addition, the people who have already supported us on Patreon, who really allow us to continue to do this show and to do so without completely breaking the bank, includes this list of very generous, awesome people that we just really appreciate, which includes Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, and Kiera. I hope I'm saying Kiera correctly. Thank you all so much for joining us. You are absolutely the best. We really appreciate you. And thank you for your continued support of what we do. Like I said, you can go join those group of people and I will list your name.
Yes. We love y'all.
Also, thank you so much to my team of people without whom I really could not do this show. They are the only reason that this continues to exist. I mean, not the only, sorry. Patreon people, you are the best. Listeners, you are very important. All of you, everyone matters. And my team of people, like, I just could not do this on my own. So I need the work and support of these people. And that includes writing and fact checking from Shane and myself. Thank you so much for recording with me today. Again, Shane.
Anytime, my friend.
Music, editing, production, all of that sort of thing is from Justin. And our social media coordinator is Elma Wilson. All right. Is there anything that I missed or anything you'd like to add before we get to our recommendations?
I think the only thing I would say is if you are not sure where to start with advocacy groups or organization for folks with Down syndrome, the National Down Syndrome Society is a good place to start. They do some really cool legislative work, some advocacy work. They provide resources and support. They have some guidance on policy. It's a good place to start if you are not sure where to start looking for where you can be more helpful for these folks.
And you can also, if you're in the United States, just go to Google, type in your state's name and Down Syndrome Network, and I'm sure you will find something.
Yeah.
If you are not in the United States, look at your city or country or local municipality, whatever it's called, Google that or use whatever search engine you prefer to use and look for Down Syndrome Network, and you will almost certainly find something. But yeah, look around online. You will find resources and activities and events going on where you can be engaged. You can just go hang out, or you can do some other contributions, and that's all good.
Yes, I love it.
Awesome. All right, well, let's get to some recommendations.
Yay!
Recommendations.
Okay, I am recommending a movie that I saw recently. This is featured only on Hulu. I believe this is a Hulu exclusive. So if you have access to Hulu, go check that out. Otherwise, this might be a little bit tricky, although I believe that they do come around to other platforms at some point somehow. This is a movie that is called Self-Reliance. This was written and directed by Jake Johnson. Also has Anna Kendrick and Natalie Morales in it. This is what is actually described as, and what I agree with, as the genre of sort of comedy thriller, sort of. There is a lot of action. There's a lot of comedy. There is a lot of sort of white knuckle suspense type moments going on. I found it really engaging and a lot of fun. So, and it's not terribly long. I think the movie's only around 2 hours, maybe a little less than that, maybe like hour 45 or something.
Okay.
I don't want to give too much away. I think suffice it to say it's one of these like, guy gets enrolled in an internet game where his life is at stake. Yeah, one of those type of things. And so there it is.
I like that. That's so fun. I am going to add it to my list because I am making more of an effort this year to watch more movies and television. So I want to make sure that I'm doing a better job of that. And I want to stay up to date. I want to make sure that I've got, I want to know all the pop culture things. I don't want to get lost in the fray. Like, I don't want to end up in a situation where, like I am now, where I've never watched a single episode of Game of Thrones. And I'm like, I have no idea what people are talking about. I want to be in the zeitgeist.
All these references, what do they mean?
What do they mean? What is a dragon queen? So I'm going to recommend an album, and this is going to come with a bonus recommendation within it.
Ooh.
So I consume music. It's probably a problem,
voraciously,
I would say. It's a real concern. I think if this were any other thing, people would be like, you need to go get help.
Really stretching Spotify's like, how much is an appropriate amount to charge? And they're like, well, based on Shane's, we do not charge enough.
Yeah, it was something like
consumed.
I got my Wrapped last year, and it was something like 90,000 minutes of music I listened to in the year. It was like something like 23 days straight that I listened to music.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that.
It was so much music. So anyway, this is an album that I really love, and it's not in print anymore. It's not on Spotify. I don't think it's difficult to find, but it is one that I think is like this beautiful gem. And that's the band Archers of Loaf. And they have a live album that came out in 2000 called Seconds Before the Accident. I think this was released right after they broke up, and this was like the only live recording they had that was like a full album.
Wow.
Now they've come back and they've put out more albums, and they put out a live album called Curse of the Loaf.
Cool.
Which is really good. It's a really good live album. But the difference is the set list that's on this live album is really good. And I like it because it's messy. Like it's not a really clean, great recording. It's a great recording, but they're like the musicianship is not like as tight as some of the other stuff.
Sure.
And I really like that about live albums. And so I was able to find the CD on Discogs. If you go on discogs.com, which is an older recommendation, like you can go in and find like all these albums that are no longer in press, these rare records. Like, so I found the CD, and I found Less Than Jake does they put out one vinyl that was called Greased. That was them doing covers of the Grease soundtrack.
Oh, I actually saw that when it came out, but I didn't get it.
Yeah, but they can't publish it or print it anywhere because of copyright laws. So, But it does exist, and so I was able to find that on Discogs as well. So bonus recommendation is Discogs. If you're looking for old music that you grew up with that you can't find for some reason, it's kind of like a used CD store, vinyl store. You get it from independent sellers, so which is really cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to be clear for everyone, it kind of sounded like you were saying Discogs, which would read as Discogs if you were reading it, but it's Discogs. Discogs.
Yes. Discogs. Yeah, and you can also keep track and value your record collection on there too. So,
oh, hey, it's like what I do with my games on BoardGameGeek.com.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, except it's just for music now.
Cool. right. Well, if you'd like to tell us about a thriller comedy or a relatively unavailable live album from a band, you should certainly reach out to us and tell us. If you'd like to comment on anything that we said about Down syndrome in this episode, we are interested in hearing from you. You can email us directly, info@wwd.podcast.com. You can also reach us on the social media platforms. We really want to talk to everybody. So yeah, feel free to get in contact with us. Is there anything that I missed or anything you'd like to add before we say our goodbyes?
Nope, not today.
All right. Well, that was not a shorter one because we said it was going to be, but here we are. This is Abraham.
This is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.